unleashing female power.
Being a disruptor.
I'm always constantly telling the truth.
I love
art. That's all her life.
She's alive and female.
Being a woman, what it meant.
Prove him wrong.
Girls run the world.
We're rocking the place.
Welcome to the Art Pod. I'm your host, Carolina, and I'll be your guide through this Pandora's box. Strap yourselves in for a journey through the art world where we bring you candid conversations, untold stories, uncover industry secrets, and celebrate the women who are shaping its future. Because in the Art Pod, the spotlight is always on the girls. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Art Pod. My guest today is Grace Astrove. Welcome.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here.
So a little bit about Grace. She was born and raised in Richmond, Virginia. Grace graduated from Connecticut College with a Bachelor of Arts in Art History and received a Master of Arts from Virginia Commonwealth University. Grace has lived and worked in New York City since 2012 and currently serves as the Director of Corporate Relations for Governor's Island Foundation. She previously held positions at the Jewish Museum, the American Museum of Natural History, Performa, and Magazzino Italian Art. So let's start with the most current thing you're doing, which is being the Director of Corporate Relations for Governor's Island Foundation. And maybe we can start a little bit about you telling me about Governor's Island Foundation.
Sure. So this position is actually really new for me. I just started at the beginning of September. So I've been a longtime fan of Governor's Island as just a public visitor, but I'm still learning so much about the island history and everything that we do there. But for those who don't know, the island is in New York Harbor. You can see it from downtown Manhattan. You can see it from Brooklyn. There's a very short 4-minute ferry from Lower Manhattan. So it really is this accessible park that is in the middle of New York Harbor. And it has a long 400-year history. And it was a military base for a long time. And then 20 years ago, actually next year is the 20th anniversary of when the island became open to the public. Mm-hmm. And for a long time, it was open seasonally. And now it's open 12 months a year. And it is free to New Yorkers to visit. There are, I believe, 127 acres.
Wow.
And historic homes and a lot of free programming that happens. But there's also seasonal restaurants and vendors that are there. There's a high school that's there. There's a spa. So there's so much going on.
There's a high school that's there?
There is.
An active one?
Yeah. So New York Harbor School, similar to Bronx Science, it's a specialty high school. Mm-hmm. And the students, it's public and free to go. The students apply to it when they're applying to high schools. And their focus is on marine trades. Mm-hmm. So they are actively working on the island, and part of their education is learning about marine life and climate and sustainability in New York Harbor. So
I never knew that.
Yeah.
Why?
And the
I never see students there.
Well, I know. And so the ferry is kind of like their school bus.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's really great. So there's so much going on there. And at the foundation itself, we really focus on fundraising for climate and open spaces, which is sort of us saying it's a huge park and we are actively planting and building new structures and also renovating the historic buildings. And then Governor's Island Arts, which is something that I was especially excited about. There's so much public art that is permanent on island that's been commissioned, but then also seasonally there's new art being added. And then part of that we have orgs in residence, which mm-hmm. are inside these historic buildings. And so different organizations, a lot of them are arts-based and are nonprofits or educational, like Pratt is one of the organizations in residence. And NADA is also there. Yeah. So they have these, they have the ability to free of charge, they apply and get approval to be in the houses. So it's kind of this whole community that's there that is thriving. So
yeah. I never knew half of what you just said. And I go to Governor's Island all the time, especially for NADA.
Right. Which I think is the beauty of it. I mean, people go there to do bird watching and fishing, and people go there to spend the night at collective retreats or go for a spa day, or they're there to see the art or something really specific like NADA, or big festivals. Like this weekend we have Pumpkin Point, which is a huge family festival and we'll have about 20,000 visitors, or school. So
Yeah.
it's really an incredibly thriving ecosystem.
Yeah, like during the summer days when it's really nice, and I love riding the ferry because it's only like $2 and something.
Yeah.
There's these like pockets where you can like be on a hammock on Governor's Island, and you
Yeah.
can just sit there and like read a book. That's like one of my favorite
It's
things to
great.
do.
Yeah. So that's Hammock Grove. It's
Okay.
like right in the middle of the island, sort of the start of the south part of the island. And it's beautiful. And I, having worked many different jobs in the city, it is kind of incredible to have this job that I'm in New York City, but you feel like you're in the middle of nature. Our offices look out onto New York Harbor or out onto the park area. And at least so far, I've made a good effort every day to walk the island, go somewhere, go sit in a hammock, and just really enjoy it, because especially right now, it's just so beautiful.
Yeah. So we're actually filming this right before Halloween.
Yes.
But it will air after Halloween.
Okay.
So I want to ask, is Governor's Island haunted?
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
Like for sure haunted.
Okay.
There, as I've been meeting different people who've worked there for a long time, hearing crazy stories, like back when it was a military base, people like lived there year round, and there were schools, and there was a movie theater, there was a Super 8 hotel, there was a bookstore. It was just like any other neighborhood.
Mhm.
And the Super 8 hotel looks very haunted. It's an abandoned building now. And an area that's called Castle William, which is one of the 2 national parks buildings on the island, which are the national parks is part of Governor's Island. They have about 25-ish acres of the
Mhm.
island belong to the national parks, and those are the 2 historic forts that are there. So in Castle Williams, it was a daycare for a long time, but then at Halloween, it was the haunted house.
Okay.
So the kids would go to daycare, and then the next night would be going to this terrifying, because it's this castle. It looks dungeonous. It's so scary. You go in there now in the middle of the day and it's scary. And then they would go back the next morning to, classes. But I think the one that I've heard a couple people tell me is that there is a basketball court that is not part of the high school. It's part of the old school that used to be there, is very haunted. And there are like basketballs that are still in the gym, and people hear them moving and bouncing and who knows what else. But so many of the buildings are under renovation or haven't even been touched, because it's an extremely huge lift for the island. Nearly everything on the island is under historical preservation, and going into that and doing the renovations, it's so much more expensive and takes a lot more time, just for all the rules and regulations and specialty contractors you need and materials. So it's a long, slow process to get everything usable now. But right now, you walk around and it feels very like spooky and haunted.
Oh,
and I love
100%.
it.
Yeah.
There are buildings that are just, there are trees growing inside of buildings
Yeah.
because no one's been inside of them for 40 years. And it's kind of magical in a way. Like similar to on Roosevelt Island, there's the smallpox hospital that's there.
That one scares the crap out of me.
I think that gets a lot of attention because
Yeah.
you see it from the FDR, and a lot of people know about it. But Governor's Island has some like gorgeously old, if you're into abandoned buildings.
Yeah.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah, no, I love it. I remember the first time I went to Governor's Island, and I was by that fortress, like right on the edge. It's like really tall. I think it was like a former.
So that's Castle William.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's where I was, and I swear like I just got the vibe. I'm like, this place is haunted.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it was a military fort. A lot of crazy stuff happened. And
Yeah.
It's had people on the island since the 1600s. It was originally a hunting and fishing camp and retreat for the original native tribes who were in New York City before the Dutch came. And it was called Nut Island at the time.
Nut Island?
Nut Island,
Okay.
N-U-T Island, or in their language, which
Yeah.
I forget what that is now, but because the island is known for having nut trees and still does, chestnut trees. And so it was used as that. And then it became a retreat. And the reason it's called Governor's Island, no apostrophe, like multiple governors, is because there were governors of New York when it was under British rule before we have the current system we have now. And it was then a retreat for them. So it was like this, vacation spot, daily retreat for them to do hunting and fishing on the island. So it was multiple governors island.
I love how you know
I
like
just
the
stuck.
entire history of this island.
Well, you learn it pretty quickly. I mean, I guess I've been there for about 7 weeks, and the people that work there just love to share information, and they're as an incredible group of volunteers and volunteer guides who are 100% volunteer. They do not get paid. And the first couple of weeks I was there, I had a few different ones give me tours because they all have different interpretations and favorite spots. And I would sort of just have people drive me around on golf carts, which, on my first day of work, I had to take a driving test so I could drive a golf cart. Yeah.
Do you know how to drive?
I know how to drive a car, and I've driven golf carts. I drove a golf cart at Magazzino, but no one had me take a driving test then. So, just hearing different people's perspectives, and I love history, and I love history of New York, and it's just so rich. It sounds like I know a lot, but I feel like there's still so much I don't know.
Speaking of volunteers,
yes,
can you tell me a little bit about the dogs of Governor's Island?
Oh my goodness. So yes. On Governor's Island, we have what are called working dogs. And I think in our history, we've had 6 or 7. All of them are retired except for Reed, who's our current working dog. And
Reed is holding the fort all by
Reed is
himself.
holding the fort down. We're looking for another working dog.
Okay.
But you do have to come. You have to also work there because you bring them to work with you. And so the working dogs on Governor's Island do a host of things. But one of their main things is to deal with the population of geese on the island. It is a environmentally friendly way of dealing with them. And they do other things like be cute for children, and they're great. So they're all little mascots, but they have their own Instagram account, and they're great little ambassadors for the island.
Yeah, I love it. When you told me about them, I'm like, this is so
I know.
cute.
It's fun. And I've never had a job where you can just like take a dog on a walk when you want to.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So now that we've talked a little bit about Governor's Island and its history and the working dogs, tell me what your role is there and kind of your main responsibilities.
Sure. So I'm the director of corporate relations, which is a sort of vague title. A lot of titles in development are vague. And I've always thought that's because it is so hard to put into a box what a development team member does at an arts institution or any nonprofit institution. We have these titles, but in development, for those who do it, know you do everything from fixing a toilet to doing check-in to walking with a board member to pitching 6 and 7 figure dollar gifts. So you kind of do everything. But corporate relations pretty much means if a company of any size is engaging with the island, I'm sort of their first touch point. And that's everything from corporate engagement. So that would be corporate volunteering, which Governor's Island has a really robust corporate volunteer program because we have so much going on the island. It's a lot of horticultural projects that we have them do, weeding and planting and mulching and raking. And with the Pumpkin Point Festival coming up, we've had hundreds of volunteers out helping us lift pumpkins and set things up and make things beautiful for the island. So they're doing really practical things because we have a huge island and a horticultural staff of only 6 full-time, and we have a couple seasonal, but we need like physical help to make the island beautiful and sustainable and to cultivate it for all New Yorkers. So volunteering is huge. And essentially we have memberships. And one of the benefits of membership is that we invite you to volunteer with us. So it is a pay to play in some way. We don't just let anyone, any company come and do a volunteer project because it is a lift for us. It's good press for them. It's, you are exchanging money. And that's important to remember. But the way we frame it is that you're joining membership at, say, the $10,000 level. And one of your benefits is that you can bring 50 employees to have a volunteer day with us. And they come over on the ferry. They work with horticultural team
Mhm.
for a couple hours and learn about the island and do their project,
Yeah.
and then have a fantastic lunch at Taco Vista or Island
Oh.
Oyster and some drinks and go back on the ferry. And it's a great experience for them. And one of the most rewarding things has been riding the ferry with a lot of these employees. And so many of them are visiting Governor's Island for the first time, and that their first interaction with us is service and literally getting their hands dirty and working in the island itself. So I love that. So volunteering is huge. We also do like corporate retreats and rentals and sort of
Mhm.
things where it's less service, but having a scavenger hunt or having people out for an afternoon of team building, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then it's sponsorships, which is sort of the biggest area of corporate fundraising overall. And we raise money for season sponsorships, which is pretty popular at many nonprofits these days. It gives us the freedom to plan ahead and have money in the bank to then sort of have the freedom to design precisely what the program would be later. So for us, that would mean our high season is like March to November, essentially. And so we would pitch to a corporation to be a season sponsor. So this 2025 season sponsorship by X.
Mhm.
And they would get extensive marketing and all of the different programming that would happen. So any educational programming or new arts commissions that are happening, it would sort of run the gamut on everything on the island going on then. And then there's things like a ferry sponsorship. So we are launching a brand new ferry, our first in like 60 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes. And this
Very
will
much
be,
needed.
Yes, this will be the first hybrid ferry
Mhm.
that's part of the transit system in New York City. So it's a
Okay.
huge deal. And we are looking for a corporate sponsor. And not all nonprofits are as open to companies putting logos on things.
Mhm.
I think Governor's Island is more open to that. And my stance is kind of if it makes sense. I never want a nonprofit, a museum, an arts organization to look like NASCAR is kind of what I think of it
Okay,
as.
yeah.
I mean, that's sort of the negative end of corporate sponsorship.
Mhm.
You think of sports sponsorships, and those aren't always appropriate. I wouldn't put McDonald's logo on the side of the ferry. That just doesn't have anything to do with what we're doing.
Mhm.
But a tech company that is creating solutions for climate and biodiversity, their logo on the side of the first hybrid ferry in New York
Yeah.
Harbor, like those things make sense
Mhm.
and could be beautiful and a great new partnership. So, and it's like a billboard in the middle of New York
Yeah.
Harbor.
And so many people take that ferry.
Exactly. So that's one of the things we're working on right now in terms of sponsorships. And then corporate
When is it launching?
So it is launching winter. We're saying winter because
Okay.
winter is a whole
Winter,
season.
spring.
Winter, winter, spring. I don't have
Okay.
exact dates. But apparently it takes a long time to build a ferry.
Okay. Figures.
I've learned.
Yes.
And I've learned a lot about ferries. And so it's kind of anything. You imagine a company coming and I sort of deal with whatever they want. And then the other end of things, which is I've done corporate for a long time since I was a natural history museum, and corporate philanthropy and corporate engagement on that end of things is just lacking overall in this world.
Mhm.
A lot of that is because so many corporations have created their own foundations, which is fantastic. They have their own initiatives, their own pillars that they want to fulfill. So instead of investing in a museum's internship program, they're going to have their own internship program. And that's just become something we've seen overall. So corporations are less interested in corporate philanthropy now. They're more interested in corporate engagement, which is like volunteering and sponsorships. So yeah, so it's sort of everything and anything. And the foundation.
What's the difference between being a corporate like philanthropist and then a sponsor?
So a philanthropist is you expect pretty much nothing in return.
Okay, I see.
It's 100% tax deductible donation. And people, it can mean a lot of different things, but my relationship with it in my career has been, if it's philanthropy, it is 100% tax deductible donation. It is, we'll credit them, we acknowledge them, we thank them, but it is an altruistic gift. It's not an exchange of goods. It's not, we are giving you money so that you put our logo on things.
Right. Okay.
We are giving you money so you host an event for us. It is, we believe in your mission and we want to give you money to do that thing. So that's sort of the difference. And companies just, it goes up and down. Some are still really investing. Con Ed, Bloomberg are the hugest donors for Governor's Island and also all of the other arts organizations
I feel
in
like
New York
Bloomberg
City.
is sustaining arts organizations.
They really are.
Yeah.
And so not to say that no one does it, but it's just of less interest to companies. Understandably, they have a bottom line too that they have to meet.
Yeah.
And they can't always be philanthropic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, speaking a little bit about your responsibilities,
Mhm.
can you tell us a little bit about what's the most rewarding aspect of your job?
Well, it may sound crass to say, but just like getting the money. It is.
Yeah. Okay, fair.
that my whole job is to get the money.
Yeah.
And I think having those wins it's so fulfilling. And I think it is, you just feel like you've got a win for the team, a win for your own position. And the fact that you were able to launch this grant, this proposal, this thing out in the world, and some company, some foundation, some individual believed in it and said, yes, I want to support you, this organization, but also you, the officer who's gone out there and done it. There's nothing like it. When a grant gets accepted, it's so great. When a check comes in, it's thrilling. When you're at a meeting and someone says, yes, I want to support you, it's great. And I feel it on a personal level, just knowing that I've done a good job at my job. But when I'm at an institution that I also care about, it feels good to do something good for them. And organizations like this do not exist without support. And so that's definitely the most rewarding thing.
Speaking of getting that money.
Yes.
Let's talk about a little bit about what it takes to get those 6 and 7 figure checks.
Yeah. I'm clearly not someone who is shy about it or shy at all. And I think first and foremost, getting that money, it takes a certain personality to want to work in development, want to talk about money, want to ask for money. I never found it difficult. I didn't realize that people did find it difficult. I did a lot of lay leadership fundraising growing up for my private high school and then for my college and other like small nonprofits that I was involved in. And I was always like, yeah, everyone should give me all the money for the things. I never like questioned it. I was just like, this is something great. You should want to believe in it too. And you should want to support it. And I myself would support the same things. So it just always felt really normal to me. So I think having that outlook first and foremost makes a lot easier. Believing in what you're actually raising money for makes it 1,000 times easier. And then for me, it's really all about relationship building. And I didn't get my first 6 or 7 figure dollar gift probably until my 5th or 6th year on the job, which is pretty normal. And most gifts at all, really, you don't like from start to finish. A lot of those will take a year, which is what I think a lot of leaders and directors who are under pressure to raise money, it does take time, especially with someone who's new at an organization or a young organization or a new program. People in the world need time to adjust to not only the person that's asking for the money, but to understand the organization, get to know it. It's like you're dating. you don't decide a week later you're going to marry the person. I mean, some people do, but it happens. I did actually already get my first 5-figure gift in my job.
Nice.
So sometimes it does happen, but generally it takes a while. And it's really all about the relationship and the trust. And that's mostly for corporate and individual. And then for grants, it could be the longest process ever. And there are so many people who are brilliant grant writers, and that's what they specialize in. I am not one. I have done grants. It is rewarding at the end of the day to get something from NEA. It's like so thrilling, but it is backbreaking grant writing. And I have so much respect for the people that do that. But in my area, which is really individuals and corporations, it is building those relationships and getting them to know you and the organization. And I've always taken the perspective, not only that you should give me your money because this is a great thing, but that I'm less asking for something and I'm more like inviting that person to become a part of this organization. And you do that by giving me money. But I'm not saying all I want is your money. I think there has to be synergy there, and there has to be trust there that you're on the same mission and you want the same things, and you're inviting them to be a part of this community, like part of our mission. And some people drink the Kool-Aid, and that's great, and some don't. And the losses are always really hard because we do have goals. And if we don't meet those goals, you're digging into your endowment, or you're begging your board for more money, or you're doing layoffs. I mean, there are real ramifications for not meeting your goals in a nonprofit, as I think a lot of people understand. I hope they understand that a lot of nonprofits, especially smaller ones, younger ones, they don't have a reserve of money sitting there. They have to raise the money now, or else bad things will happen.
Yeah.
And
can you deal with that pressure?
Yeah,
I feel like that's a lot.
I like the pressure a little bit. I think it's fueling sometimes to know that. And I like goals, and I like letting people know that there's pressure, and it's the end of the fiscal year. It's the end of the calendar year. For a gala, for example, that's an area where people really advertise what the goal is typically. And there's like this momentum to sort of reach the goal. In other areas, less so. I think when you're in the nitty gritty with a funder, you might say, the goal for this project is $4 million, and we are this ways away from it. But I think it can fuel people. You definitely feel pressure, especially if you've sent out 100 asks and 2 come in, and you just, shoot your shot on everything, and you have an unlucky year, or you're asking the wrong people. You never know what can go wrong. And that's why those wins are so important for your own self-esteem in this job, because it is brutal. If your entire worth working in development is the money you bring in. It's a lot like working on commissions basis, and being a salesperson, your value is what you bring into the organization. And if you're not meeting those goals, there's clearly an issue there. Yeah.
Do you guys have like built-in sponsors that come back year after year besides Bloomberg and Con Ed?
We don't have built-in sponsors that come back year after year, but we have built-in members who have renewed their membership for 10, 12 years. And that's pretty typical. We do have an area of fundraising on the island, which is, we term Living Lab, which is part of it is this incredible climate this climate piloting program.
Okay.
It's a mouthful, which actually just launched today. And every year we put out an RFP for anyone, companies, individuals, to tell us what their climate solution idea is. And usually there's like a specific theme to it. And we give them, I believe they receive grants of $10,000 to actually put their plan into action. And they use the island, they use our resources, like physically they're on the island working on it. And we have a number of funders who have been funding that since it launched, with 6-7 figure gifts, really substantial. And I think it's been so popular because it meets a lot of things like economic development, real practical world solutions. We like having this idea that you can go and see what they're doing. It's workforce development. It's sort of like venture funding. It's a lot of different things. So that's been extremely popular. And so that's one area we see a lot of people come back time and time again. And but for season sponsorships, it's more of a newer idea that has launched in the last year or so of Governor's Island. So hopefully.
Yeah. So obviously another big part of fundraising is galas.
Yes.
And I just saw that Governor's Island had theirs.
We did.
Like a few weeks ago?
Oh my, it feels so long ago, but I think it was like 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
Do you only have 1 or 2 a year? And how can you tell us a little bit about how making a gala happens?
Sure.
How making a gala happens?
How you do a gala.
Yeah, there you go.
How you do a gala. Governor's Island does have 1 gala a year. We also have a special event in the summer called Sunset Soiree that is on the island and is ticketed. So it's a small size fundraiser. But we just had our gala and we raised $1 million, which was our goal. So that was great. We honored Andy Darrell, who is at the Environmental Defense Fund, and he was so incredible. Galas are great. They're especially good when you have someone who's being honored, who is really doing the work. And I think a lot of people don't know, unless they work in the field, that when you're honored at a gala, your job is to raise money. And Andy really did it.
So you're not there just to look pretty.
No, you're not. Well, we also honored Charles Gaines.
Okay.
And I think the understanding with a lot of organizations, like the Jewish Museum, we always had like a corporate honoree and a arts and culture honoree. And there was little to no expectation that the cultural honoree would bring in funding. Understandably, sometimes their gallery would put in a few tickets. Sometimes their collectors might be interested. But in general, your corporate or your money honoree, having them bring in at least a quarter of your fundraising goal is pretty standard. So Andy was incredible, a great partner. And then we also honored Maria Torres Springer, who the day of the gala, she was announced as the first deputy mayor.
Oh, nice.
It was a little stressful because in light of all of the things going on at City Hall and the mayor's office.
Yep.
But Maria has been an incredible advocate for the island for so long. And we were really happy that she was untainted by anything happening, and on that day became first deputy mayor. So that was really exciting. So the gala, we've already started planning for next year's, because that's literally what happens. You finish a gala, you have about a week where you do wrap up and acknowledgements, and then you start next year's gala. And usually the first things you're looking at are your honorees and your location, because those are the things that need to be figured out so far in advance. And then kind of you have a while to figure out the other things. 6 months in advance, you're figuring out your co-chairs, the other money people who are really going to contribute, any other sponsors or vendors, that kind of stuff. And then you were pushing to sell tables, and some tickets. Tickets aren't as important. Tables are really important, and corporate really comes in strong there. At most galas, a lot of companies, and usually it's your supporters of other programs, they will buy a table. It is a great use for them to have their CEOs or other people have this benefit of going to a nice gala. And I think it's important for them to have a presence at an event that is really high profile for us, to have the Amazon table. Amazon is a great partner of ours. And they've always bought a gala table, and it's incredible. And the gala, actually, you were asking about having the same sponsors time and time again. Gala is really where that happens.
Okay.
And it is oftentimes galas, special events are like the easiest ask. It's fun. It's lighthearted in a way. It's less money than you would ask for some huge project. And it's something they can like wrap their brains around really easily. And if they have an association with the honorees, that's great. And I also love galas and special events as a way to connect with new donors because it's, I don't know, it's just a little lighter and easier way to connect with people.
What do you think it is about galas that makes people want to actually donate money as opposed to just donating money?
It's the alcohol.
Okay, fair.
I mean, well, at the event itself,
Yeah.
It's the alcohol. Definitely helps. And you're kind of like swept up into this magic of the event itself. And you're surrounded by 400 people who are all in a room for the same reason, which is that they like love this institution. And it's easy to get swept up into that for sure. And I also think people love things like, especially in New York. I don't know outside of New York how well galas work, but the gala circuit in New York is real.
Yeah, because there's a lot of rich people here.
Checking BFA every morning is real. You know, people expect it, and it's, you want to see who's there and who's supporting and who's wearing what and who's with who and who's at what table. And I think it's like a New York thing. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked a little about the galas. What do you consider long-term strategic development plans that include corporate sponsorship, major donor relationships, planned giving and endowment, and capital campaigns?
What do I consider them like of importance to my career?
I would say, how do you consider like long-term strategic development plans for all these sections?
Yeah. That is a challenging question.
I can imagine.
That's like my life question.
Literally.
I mean, I can speak mostly to corporate. I think planned giving, I know absolutely nothing about. That's also, like grants, I think is an incredibly specialized area and really delicate. You're asking people about their end of life and about their wishes. And oftentimes it's people who have had long associations with the institution. At Natural History, we had an incredible director of planned giving, and he spent his whole career and time with these older people who were so dedicated to this institution that they were going to put us in their will. And it's also really sensitive because as your major donors are getting older, you need to have these conversations. I just went off on a planned giving tangent, which I know nothing about, but it's really fascinating because at Performa, for example, and a lot of people dealt with this with Toby Devin Lewis, who is massive arts funder. And she died in 2022. And I think a lot of places had a planned giving, set up with her. At Performa, we did not, but Toby had been our most generous individual giver for a while, and we had relationship with her children, and it would be brought up occasionally, but it was sensitive, and we were such a small team there and no one specialized in it, and you really need someone who's specializing in it to have these tough conversations and have it from a legal aspect as well. And we got incredibly lucky that she had put $1 million into her, I believe $1 million, into her will for Performa regardless. And she did it to a lot of organizations, but that was really lucky because someone like Toby, you count on their support every year if they're a major donor. And if you don't have that set up in a will, you could lose hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, especially when you look on the scale of a place like Natural History Museum. So that's planned giving. But I think in corporate, my like long-term strategic planning around corporate, since I've just started a new place, is really interesting to think about. And we're also celebrating our 20th anniversary next year of the island being open to the public, which is exciting. We've had 20 strong years, and we have a roster of corporate supporters who, for the most part, have supported us every year or who are newer. And I kind of want to look at re-engaging the ones who maybe supported us in the very beginning, these like founding donors who were a part of us. And and I think there are a lot who maybe had an interest right away and it was this exciting new project, but for this reason and that, a lot of times corporations don't get as much attention or as much handholding or cultivation, just because the one issue with corporate, on another tangent, is that you are dealing with an individual.
Okay.
And sometimes that individual leaves that company and you've spent all this time building a relationship with that person and they go somewhere new. And if they didn't hand off your relationship to someone else, sometimes you lose that company for years until you build it up again. Now, the other side is that that person may go to a different company you've never had a relationship with, and may bring them in. So companies are really just individual relationships. And I think that's why there's not as so much sustainability in a corporate donor, unlike places like Bloomberg and Con Ed, which are these massive institutions in New York, that there's so much fluctuation with who works there. Their priorities change, of course, but it's also these core relationships. If you lose them because the person at Governor's Island leaves or the person at Bank of America leaves, you kind of have to start from ground zero. So I want to look back at our corporate history and see who was with us back then, who should be re-engaged during an anniversary year. Also looking at our corporate volunteer and engagement programming long-term, it's kind of been running on train tracks really stably for a while, and how that can kind of be reinvigorated. It's a huge lift for the island to do, for the staff to do. And is it making as much money as it could be making? Do we need to have higher membership values set there so that it's more, quote unquote, like, I hate to say worth our time, but like it makes it worth our time, because everything is about return on investment.
Right.
And I think like my other long-term focus for corporate is downtown Manhattan is like the heart of corporate America.
You're literally
the
right
heart
by Wall
of,
Street.
Right. The heart of like corporate New York in so many ways, especially since post-COVID. I feel like Midtown was a big thing for a while. And then post-COVID, everyone's downtown.
Yeah. Flatiron is having a new come up.
Yeah, that too. And I really want the companies of Lower Manhattan to look at Governor's Island as their Central Park. Like, I want them to look at the ferry as an easy thing to hop on at the end of the day, on the weekend with their families. And they should all feel like their company is investing in this island that belongs to New Yorkers, that I feel like really especially belongs to downtown Manhattan, in the way that the Upper East Side feels like they own Central Park.
Yeah.
You know, they really have that feeling there. And Central Park Conservancy sort of has ownership of Midtown and Upper Manhattan in a way that I think Lower Manhattan should. And I always love when we have a new company come over, and we actually had the CEO at S&P come, and we're doing corporate membership, and he had lived and worked in New York City in Lower Manhattan for like 30 years. He could see Governor's Island for his entire career from his like office window.
Yeah, they're all high rises. You can see it from like miles away.
But when he came a couple weeks ago, it was the first time he was ever coming to the island.
Wow.
And he just like fell in love. And so it's really making these companies in downtown Manhattan like fall in love with us and just getting there.
Yeah.
And seeing it as their park.
They 100% need it, because that area is just concrete on concrete and high rises.
It is so much. And the island is just there for people.
It is. And it's really beautiful. The second you step foot on there, it's like magic.
It doesn't feel like New York.
Exactly.
It really doesn't. And I'm such a like water person. And even though it was funny when I first started, I was like, I can't believe I'm going to work on an island. My father was like, Grace, you live on an island.
It's true.
And I was like, okay, yeah, technically, but I live on the Upper East Side. I don't feel like I see water.
Yeah.
You know, I don't feel connected to the water in a way
You're right by the river, by the way.
I'm on,
'cause you're on the Upper East Side.
Second. It's
Oh,
like
come
I
on.
can't see it. But yeah, it's such a remarkable place. And I think New York City has this love of Central Park. I love Central Park.
I love it too.
I love it. And Governor's Island like can be that, especially for downtown Manhattan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. Speaking about Governor's Island and the future.
Yeah.
What exciting things are coming up?
Sure.
Besides
So-
the ferry sponsorship.
Yeah, so the ferry is really exciting, actually. Well, one, because being the first hybrid ferry in New York Harbor is so essential.
Mhm.
The things that I read about gas and emission is horrific, especially in New York
Yes.
Harbor, which is so busy.
Mhm.
So that's exciting. We are actually, so a funny thing about my job is that I work for the foundation, the Governor's
Mhm.
Island Foundation. Technically, when I was hired, I worked for the Friends of Governor's Island, which is what the nonprofit arm of the Trust for Governor's Island has been called since it was started 20 years ago. The trust is I'm gonna mess this up, but it's like a pseudo governmental organization.
Okay.
Basically, the city of New York had this island, owned this island, and they wanted to give it to New Yorkers. And a way to do that was to create a trust. And they appointed a CEO, president, and staff. And they said, here's the island. Here's some startup money, essentially. And Bloomberg also came in with mass amounts of funding for development of the island. And the trust was created. The city still does give us a large portion of our annual need. It's just under 70%. I think it's like 68, 69% of the funding.
Mhm.
And those things go to like operations, literally running the ferry, staffing, trash, road
Wait, does
maintenance.
Governor's Island pay for the ferry that's running now?
So the Governor's Island ferry is our ferry.
Okay.
Yes. So all of the staff that works at the Maritime Building, literally everything you can imagine, keeping the lights on, air conditioning. I mean, like the littlest things, the city provides that funding because, to be frank, it's just not a sexy thing to fundraise for.
No.
It's really
Hey,
hard.
can you like
It's
help
really-
us keep cool in the summer and keep our AC
it's
on?
a really hard thing to fundraise for,
Yeah.
but so essential. So the city, I believe in perpetuity, will continue to be generous with a fixed amount to support us. And as our costs increase, funding needs to increase for that. But so all to say, the trust is this umbrella organization. Under the trust was the Friends of Governor's Island, which Friends is not an unusual term for a nonprofit. But
Amici.
what?
Amici.
Amici di Magazzino, yes.
Yeah.
Friends is not an unusual term for a nonprofit, but it does give a ring of like a membership only program.
Mhm.
And I think it just didn't fit what they were anymore. So excitingly, the new name as of November 1st is going to be the Governor's Island Foundation, which I think is great. It sounds more substantial. People don't, especially on the corporate side of things, if I'm like the Friends of Governor's Island, they're like, I'm not a member.
Yeah.
And that's just unclear. So the other thing that's happening is for a very long time since the beginning, unofficially, the Friends, the foundation, was part of the trust.
Okay.
We have our own director, chief development officer, our own staff. We have our own like health insurance, our own accounting, our own like separate system. But the money that we raise goes to the trust.
Okay.
So it was like we would raise the money and then write a check over to them, essentially. And that's literally what we do in these very obnoxious accounting procedures now. When we would get a large gift, we would have to write this document that said, we are gifting this money to
Yeah.
you. So no, these things won't have to happen anymore. We were becoming, one entity, which is great. Also, just to kind of solidify the relationship between the two organizations. The foundation side of things, we're small. We are like 9 people, including our seasonal, and the trust is like 60. So much more robust.
Yeah.
But we are really dedicated to fundraising, and they are doing 10,000 other things. So that's really exciting. That'll be November 1st. Pumpkin Point this weekend, our big harvest festival. And the next like big event happening is we have an ice sculpture
Yes.
carving event contest. I'm not sure if it's I think it's a contest that happens in February.
Okay.
So that's our big like fun fall activity.
Nice.
But things get a little quiet on the island after November 1st until the springtime. Understandably so. A lot of our we don't have a lot of indoor space on the island other than the spa and our offices.
Which you love.
I love the spa. The spa is great. And they're a great partner of Governor's Island and give us money, and they're fantastic. We love having tenants we do refer them as tenants because they pay rentals and they're in our buildings. So we love the tenants. But there's pretty much like no food on the island in the winter because everything's outside.
Mm-hmm.
There are these like vendors that are there. So hopefully there's a building that is right when you get off the ferry that is right now empty, is going to be, I don't know what the plan is time-wise, but I think by 2026 it'll be a fully operational running indoor restaurant of sorts.
That would be great.
Yeah, so that'll be good. It'll give us more options. It'll give us at least one place besides the spa that's open year round. So it'll be quiet, which will be interesting. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what exciting not what exciting things.
Yeah.
What do you want to see happen or that you want to achieve while working for Governor's Island Foundation?
Oh my God, so much. I mean, as we talked about before, I think really getting the buy-in from Lower Manhattan and those companies there. I have, obviously meeting the goals that we have every year, but I want to have some really big wins. This ferry sponsor, which is coming in, and I've come in a little late to the game to try to get a sponsor. Those things can take years.
Yeah.
But having that, and I want to grow the fundraising so that people think of it on the level of Central Park, of even Riverside Park. I mean, or Brooklyn Bridge Park. There's always, I didn't know this world, the park world, until I got to Governor's Island, but there's a little bit of like competition between the parks and who's raising the most money at their galas and who has the most robust membership program. So I have those goals. I think my last two jobs ended in ways that I didn't love and ended too soon and for various reasons. And I think I'm just already feeling very lucky and happy to be at a place where I am loving the people and what I'm doing. And so my long-term goal is just to like stay there and be happy and not go out of my mind, which is really easy to do in fundraising and nonprofits.
I can imagine.
And I don't know, it sounds kind of silly, but something about being on the island and in nature just like keeps me feeling kind of sane at work, which is so great. As much as we all hate commuting, the days that I'm on island, it's nice when I'm there. And so, yeah, I just want to keep feeling fulfilled and happy with what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's great.
I know.
That's great.
Yeah.
So for everybody listening, please go check out Governor's Island because they have great events and it's beautiful. And even during the winter season, go check out the spa because it's lovely.
Yeah.
So now let's backtrack to the very beginning.
Okay.
Well, not the very beginning, but your education.
Well, in December of 1987.
So you hold a BA in art history and religious studies from Connecticut College and an MA in art history from Virginia Commonwealth University. And you also got a chance to study at NYU Paris Study Abroad program.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about how these studies reinforce what you do currently do?
It's kind of the opposite, in which I knew what I wanted to do. And so I chose my studies based on that. I was a 10-year-old child who knew she wanted to be a museum curator. I mean, fast forward, I'm not a museum curator, but I grew up in a family where art and museums especially were really important. I was always going to museums and around art. And I loved it. And I read wrote The Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler, which is an incredible book about two children who run off from their parents and spend a couple nights in the Met Museum. And reading that and going to museums all the time, I just thought, these are the best places in the world. This is where I want to be. And when I was younger, I thought there were two jobs in museums. There was the director, and then there was the person who like put the art on the walls, the curator. So that's what I thought I wanted to be. And so when I was looking at colleges, Connecticut College, which my father and great aunt went to, that's why I knew it. Otherwise, it would have been sort of random growing up in Virginia, going there. It's a small liberal arts school in Connecticut. They had a museum studies program, and that really interested me, that I could add on to my study something that was more concrete, because liberal arts, you don't really study vocational things. And I also knew going there I could study abroad, which was very important to me. And I loved it. So I chose to go there because of that. The religious studies came in surprisingly. I knew art history. Like I declared my major before I even got there, pretty much. And at college, we had to do general education requirements, which a lot of liberal arts schools do. Like you had to take a math, you had to take a science, you had to take a language, just like one course. And we had to take a religious studies course, and it could have been literally anything. And I took the Old Testament, and we literally read the Old Testament cover to cover. And growing up culturally Jewish, I didn't really have much of a religious education. But I loved it, and I loved the professor. And during the course, I think I like ended up writing a paper that was kind of about like religious art or something. And I was like, I want to do both of these things. And I kind of made them marry in a way that I would focus on in my religious studies courses. Like the papers I would do, I would kind of, I was doing a course on Mary Magdalene, and I would write a paper about, religious depictions of her in the 1700s in Italy, and sort of just have them sort of talk to each other, which was really great. I think they really informed each other, and they're both really just different kinds of history. Religion is a world history, and art history is a visual history, and they really talk to each other nicely. And I ended up focusing my undergrad thesis on Jewish art responses, which is what then I did my master's thesis on as well. So when I went to my master's program, I continued on to look at religious response or art responses to the Holocaust specifically. So it was artists who were modern artists in mostly America and Europe who were responding to the Holocaust in subject matter. And then it was also artists who survived the Holocaust, and then that was their subject matter. And then more than that, I was looking at how museums memorialize the Holocaust in documentation or in memorials, like physical memorials and monuments. So they kind of really like worked beautifully together. And I went straight into a master's program because I graduated in 2010 when there were no jobs. And pretty much everyone who graduated in 2009, 2010, 2011 from my school, they went straight to grad school. And I hit burnout really hard in grad school, I think without a break. But I'm also happy that I did it and it's done. But I don't recommend it to people because I thought I wanted to be a curator, and that's what I went through to do. And I did the master's in art history, and I came out and had this internship at the Jewish Museum in curatorial. And at the end of that year in that internship, I was like, I hate curating. This is not for me. But I knew I loved museums, and I loved being at the Jewish Museum so much. And there was an opening in development, and I had done some development in my past and fundraising, and I just figured, why don't I try it? And I like fell in love with it immediately.
Well, this is a nice segue because that was my next question. because you went on to work at the Jewish Museum, like you mentioned, after school. And what originally attracted you to the Jewish Museum?
Well, I think being my like subject area of focus, it was kind of perfect.
Yeah.
And I knew I wanted to move to New York from a very young age. I knew I wanted to be here. And so towards the end of graduate school, I like made a list of the 30 museums in New York that I wanted to work for and just started applying to them and finding out
Who are
if
your
I
top
had,
3?
oh God. I mean, Jewish Museum wasn't my top 3.
Of course.
And then the Met.
Of course.
And then
Who would be your third?
You know, I think it was the Whitney because I
Okay.
loved when the Whitney was uptown. I do love the Whitney now.
I like the Whitney space uptown.
I love the Whitney now, of course. But I don't know, I'm an Upper East Sider like through and through.
Oh yeah, you're an
So it was
Upper East
also
Side girl.
like I want to walk to work. And so it was the Whitney when it was in the Brero building.
Okay.
So I think it was them. And it was also looking at who do I know at these places? Because unfortunately, as many of us know, maybe this is changing. I hope this is changing. But the only way I've ever gotten a job ever is knowing someone.
Yeah, amen. That's
Ever.
literally how the art world works, connections.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the only other way that I got that internship at the Jewish Museum was that I was willing to work an entire year unpaid.
Lovely.
I was
must have been a
there.
great year.
I was only there 4 days a week. So
Okay.
it wasn't
But
full
still.
No, I know. And yeah, I was in an extremely privileged position that my parents and my grandfather were supporting me, paying for my apartment, paying for my utilities, paying for my groceries, paying for everything so that I could work for free for that organization. I don't regret it. It is what launched me on my career. But I know it was wrong. And I am very happy that laws are now in place in New York State that you cannot do that. I mean, I wasn't even receiving credit because I was done with school. There was no stipend. There was nothing. I didn't ask for anything because
That's how I was
because
too.
I
So
didn't.
I know. Yeah, that's how it was
I just
back then.
I didn't know I could do that.
Exactly.
And yeah, so I was very privileged to be able to do that. And I loved being at the Jewish Museum. So yeah.
So how
I
did you get that job? Because you said you knew somebody.
Yes.
Okay.
So we have a family friend who was an assistant curator there
Mhm.
at the time. And it got to be, I was graduating in December and I knew I was set to move there in December. And so that was kind of my deadline to figure something out. And it got to be around Thanksgiving and I wasn't getting responses that I wanted to get. And through some way, my dad had remembered something that we had a family friend who was there and we emailed her and no interview, no nothing, just friend of the family. And I went in and I started working there on December 26th. And I didn't even work for her. I worked for the chief curator.
Mhm.
And it wasn't complete dumb luck. The exhibition that I was hired to work on was Chagall, Love, War, and Exile, which is literally Chagall during the Holocaust years.
Yep. Makes sense.
So had I not had, I mean, I'm not saying they hired me because I had a connection. I had the credentials, but it got me in the door,
Right.
obviously. And I loved working on that show and it was so informative, especially that I didn't want to be a curator. But I loved it and seeing that exhibition through its entire process, pretty much being part of the catalog, part of hanging things on the wall and getting tours and selecting things and feeling like a real part of the exhibition was thrilling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you were at the Jewish Museum for 6 years
Yeah.
and you held positions from the one that you just described
Yeah.
to development assistant for institutional giving, development officer for exhibitions, and senior development officer for exhibitions.
Yeah.
Can you kind of walk us a little bit through the process of how you progressed?
Sure. One thing and one reason I stayed at the Jewish Museum for so long was because they were very good about promoting internally,
Mm-hmm.
which I have not seen at all institutions. And when I moved over to development, Elise Buxbaum, who has now been a long-term friend and mentor, came back to the museum. She actually worked there previously And actually a lot of people at the Jewish Museum have done that, which I think is a mark of a good institution.
Yeah, when you leave and you're like, I'm coming
and
back.
other people, and I would go back there.
Yeah.
There's just not a position that I'm ready to take there,
Right.
but I say all the time, I would go back there and work there in a heartbeat. So she had gone a few different places, Cooper Hewitt most recently, and then came back to the Jewish Museum to lead as I think at the time she was hired as the director of development and then finished as chief development officer. And from the get-go, she was an incredible mentor. Obviously, I'd never held a position in development before, but she recognized that I knew the museum already and had relationships with curators already. So I only spent about a year as the institutional giving associate, which is just like doing general things like learning the CRM system and drafting emails, simple things. But because of this relationship with the curators, she created a position that was fundraising specifically for exhibitions, which is something that exists a lot of institutions. We just didn't have it at the Jewish Museum at the time. So because of her, really, she made this position, and she also kind of had this belief that every 2 years, you're either up or you're out. And I have always kind of held that in me, that if I'm at a place and if every 2 years I'm not being promoted, then I'm being fired or I need to leave. Like,
what if there's no way to be promoted to? What if you're like at the top and then what?
Okay, maybe not a title promotion, then a major salary bump. Like, I think your value should be appreciating
100%.
Or you need to look for other opportunities.
Yeah.
And that is really why I stayed for so long. And I really felt that. But at the end of 6 years, that's what happened. There were 2 positions above me that were filled. Those people weren't going anywhere. And that's really why I chose to leave. I loved working there. I'm still extremely involved in their Young Patrons program. I'm there all the time. I'll be there like twice in a couple of weeks. And it was just kind of time for me to experience a different kind of place. I mean, you hear about women, especially of a certain generation, who spend 30, 40 years at an institution. The woman that I started working for, Susan Goodman, at the Jewish Museum, who was the chief curator, she did, I think, like 1 or 2 years at the Guggenheim, and then her entire career was the Jewish Museum.
Wow.
I mean, that's incredible.
That is incredible.
But so much more unusual now. I mean, 6 years was even, I think, long for a lot of people.
Yeah,
a lot of
now,
millennials,
like
and
2-3 years, and everyone's moving on.
But I loved it, and I want that again in another institution. I like being able to be that person with institutional knowledge, and it gets, especially in development, it just gets easier. Like, I think about in curating, it's always a new exhibition. It's kind of always challenging in a way. And development really just gets easier the longer you are at a place, because those relationships are so much more in stone, and they're so much more yours, and you feel more ownership of the institution, and you have more trust of other people. It just gets so much easier.
Yeah. What would you say was your favorite aspect of working there?
Oh, I as much as I hated curating, I loved working with the curators and doing the exhibitions. And I, in the same way that, like, one of the best aspects of my job now is like receiving that check, receiving that, like, yes, we got it. When I was doing exhibition fundraising, it was like receiving the catalog and seeing the donors' names on the inside was like thrilling. And then getting to give them this catalog was great. And then when the exhibition opened and you have the donors' names on the wall and you see this show, and it was always so thrilling. And I also loved learning something new all the time. And that is something I haven't found since I did exhibition fundraising, because you're always working on a new exhibition.
Right.
And we, at any given time, we would be working on 6 or 7 exhibitions, because you're fundraising years and years out. And yeah, I just loved learning about, I was an art historian, so I still love learning about new artists and new movements and new art historians and architects and jewelry designers and costume designers. And it was thrilling. So I loved the newness of it still.
On the flip side, what was the most challenging aspect of being there?
Oh my gosh. I guess I arrived at a time when the museum was in major transition.
Mm-hmm.
They had the same director for 25 years. And then Claudia Gould came in about a year before I started to be the
Okay.
new director. I really loved working with Claudia. I know other people have not had the easiest time working with her. I had a great relationship with her. But I think more than that, the Jewish Museum felt a little wobbly at the beginning when I
Mhm.
got there, having like a little bit of an identity crisis. And that was a little challenging to deal with. We went through like a branding identity change, and that was a huge deal. And with Claudia coming in, there was a big shift towards, which I liked, commissioning contemporary artists. And we started this lobby project that was run by Kelly Tax, who was the curator at the time, where every 6 months we would have a new Jewish contemporary artist or a contemporary artist who was working in something Jewish related in the lobby. And that was incredible. And we were kind of moving away from, every year we got to do a Chagall show, every year we got to do a Modigliani show, to what are the kind of like Jewish aspects we can do. I am a millennial. I didn't grow up religious, so I really loved those things. But it was challenging to watch that transition, and it took a while for it to kind of like figure itself out. Yeah.
Fair. That's good.
Yeah. I mean, I have a hard time like finding things I
Yeah,
did.
you're like, I love the Jewish Museum.
I
I'm not
really
gonna
do.
answer.
I do talk about it literally all the time how much
Literally.
I love it there.
Yeah.
And the other best thing about working there was all the holidays.
Oh, I can
And
imagine.
people don't. It is something that was so great. Yeah. All the Jewish holidays.
Yeah, and then you decided to leave
know.
for some reason.
I know. I mean, I felt like
It was time.
I didn't have, there's nowhere for me to go up.
Mm-hmm.
And I had more or less capped out on salary. I mean, I think at a certain point, Elise got me more money than I ever thought possible in those roles. But I think at the end I was making like, this is embarrassing because I was making like high 60s, but that was like more than
That's
that
museum.
position would have been making before.
Yeah.
And
I think that's the shitty thing about museums.
it is.
Even though like my dream is always to work for either like a museum or like a private collection that's a museum, but the salaries are awful.
are really bad.
Yeah.
I mean, that's changing.
Yeah.
But a lot of that is because, and just historically, I started as an unpaid intern.
Mm-hmm.
So when they offered me my first salary, which I think was like $45,000, I was like, oh my God, that is so much
That
money.
were a lot of our first
I'm
salaries.
getting paid.
Yeah.
But I was like 26, and that's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
That's what I was getting paid.
Yeah.
And I had a master's degree. I mean, it was just,
It was wild times.
So it was that. And also I did some corporate fundraising at the Jewish Museum. I mean, corporate fundraising, especially in arts, especially in exhibitions, is like so few and far between. There were a few shows, like we did an incredible exhibition on Isaac Mizrahi,
Mm-hmm.
which was so much fun. And I love him and he was great, where there were like naturally some corporate partners like Target came in, but companies aren't really into sponsoring exhibitions unless you're the Met, Costume Institute, and
The
Vogue
Costume
comes
Institute
in
is
and
literally living
it's
large.
its own beast. Yes,
I know. They are so lucky.
So I was interested in having some corporate experience. And I had a couple friends who had worked there and really liked it. And most specifically, there was one of my colleagues from the Jewish Museum went there to work there.
Mm-hmm.
And she liked it. And I saw the posting for the corporate position and reached out, and she was like, yeah, let me set up a phone call. And I had a job 2 weeks later.
Wow, look at you.
Yeah.
Well, can you tell us a little bit about the difference working for the Natural
So
History
different.
Museum versus working for an art museum like the Jewish Museum?
More differences than I thought possible.
Okay.
I figured it's a museum, whatever. what surprised me was that the size difference wasn't actually what ended up like bothering me as much. I kind of like bureaucracy. I kind of like systems and things being built in. I enjoy those things. I think being a bit of a cog in a wheel is kind of nice, especially when you're in your early to mid career. You learn a lot without extreme pressure, and you also get given responsibilities that you might not necessarily get because you're filling in other places. But the biggest difference for me was like the overall level of creativity. I mean, in like every aspect. At the Jewish Museum, I was surrounded by art, and we had a collection, and there were artists and curators, and it felt very creative. But from a fundraising side, we were like inspired to do really creative fundraising aspects. Like the pitch decks I would create were like these beautiful booklets that were gorgeous, and I loved sending out. And it was like those attention to details kind of came through everywhere because everyone is an art historian or an artist and a perfectionist, and things were beautiful. And then also like the nature of sponsorships in general, both being a smaller institution had a little more leeway, but you could also get a little more creative. And in natural history, there was just, less ability for me to like have my creativity. And I think at the beginning I would try to make pitch decks like look a certain way or be beautiful because I was so used to that being like a standard at an art museum. And they were like, no, we don't care. Yeah. And I was like, oh, okay. So it was definitely an adjustment. And then the subject matter, of course. And at first, like it was interesting to me, but a couple years on, I just didn't have an interest in space or dinosaurs or a fish or whatever. Just not enough. And in fundraising, like you really have to care what you're doing. Otherwise it's like soul sucking.
Yeah.
And I think like the most enjoyable time I had there was when I was getting the things that were even slightly creative. Like we did a partnership and a fashion show with Brendan Maxwell. He had his, I guess it was spring, so like fall, winter. I don't know how this works, but he did a fashion show at the museum. And he also provided support for an exhibition that was about color. So it all kind of like worked together. And then when I was there, we were renovating the halls of gems and minerals. And I got to work with a lot of high-end jewelry companies on a more like creative aspect, like slightly more creative, slightly more like fun. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. I also wanted to ask you what the most challenging aspect of being at the Museum of Natural History was.
Well, I can tell you what the least challenging one was.
Okay.
First.
Okay.
And actually this was the most challenging thing about the Jewish Museum maybe was that the name recognition was there. At the Jewish Museum, one of the biggest issues with that museum is the name of the museum. People automatically think it's the Jewish Museum of Heritage, which is downtown, which is a Holocaust museum, and historical museum. The Jewish Museum is a fine arts museum. And a lot of people literally just don't know that.
That was me the first time.
No, for sure. They think it's history. They think it's the other one. There's also like so many Jewish organizations. The Jewish Museum is such a confusing title. And natural history, I found right away, not only did people have name recognition, but people were reaching out to me to be like, how can I give you money? And I was like, what? People would send inquiries about how their company can come and do XYZ, what funding opportunities exist. And that was hugely important. It was the first time I really felt that, that other people were like coming to me instead of me always going to them. I think the most challenging thing about working in natural history was just that I just wasn't really interested in what we were fundraising for. And I realized that because it wasn't that I was new, because I loved learning the new things at the Jewish Museum all the time, but having to learn everything about the new space show, I was just not interested. And then having to go into meetings and talk about that, or it just didn't really do anything for me. And it was kind of exhausting, and it made the days long, and it made the meetings longer. Yeah.
Yeah. So after 2 years, you're like, I'm out of here.
It was a little longer than 2 years.
Okay,
Plus,
fine.
it was COVID.
Okay.
So COVID wasn't easy anywhere. I was extremely fortunate to keep my job. And actually, as a piece of advice to people looking at jobs in the arts, in museums especially, fundraising is the last to go.
Yeah, because you're bringing in the money.
Exactly. Whereas programming, education, sometimes curators, it's they don't need them. So it offered career stability at a time that I never thought would come. But overall, I think people who work in development will tell you that we get paid more than other areas because we're bringing in the money.
Right.
I mean, definitely, if you just look at any reports from AAM or the New York State or NISCA, like development is where the higher salaries are always going to be, and where there's way more career stability.
Yeah, I always see postings for registrars and development.
Yes.
Yep. Okay, so you've left the American Museum of Natural History, and then you went to Performa.
Yeah.
Can you let us know how you started at Performa?
Sure. So just like at the Jewish Museum, I started looking towards the end of my time at AMNH. And I think what really propelled me was that I wanted to go back to an arts institution.
I'm sick of space.
Literally, I'm sick of space. I'm sick of bones.
Yeah.
And not to say like working there was like magical, being there alone. Talk about haunted places.
Okay.
That place is so
I can
haunted.
imagine.
Very haunted.
I mean, they literally had like, first of all, I don't even want to get into the Native American wing.
Very haunted.
Because the things that they had in there should not have been in a museum to begin with. So
I mean, you just have a museum that's been around for 150 plus years. Yeah. Very haunted. And on like sacred ground, like very haunted.
Yeah.
But so beautiful to be there after hours and before hours. That museum, one of the greatest privileges in working museums is being in empty museums.
That's my favorite thing.
It's the best.
Yeah.
And I am a member of the Apollo Circle, which is the young patrons group with the Madden. So I'm very lucky to go there when it's empty all the time. And natural history is really magical to be there when it's empty, but very haunted.
So tell us about Performa.
So Performa. So I was looking to leave and I wanted to go back to the arts.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so long ago that I don't even remember what other places I was applying to. But a friend of mine who was at the Guggenheim at the time, she was involved with Performa they had done something with the Guggenheim. And so she knew them and knew I was looking and sort of like just suggested a meeting essentially. So I went in for like a pretty informal interview that then like in the next stage turned into formal. And I had never heard of Performa before I went there, which I think is pretty typical from people that I know. I think if you know Performa, you're obsessed with it. You go every other year to the biennial, which is their largest output. They've been around for over 2 decades. And every other year in New York City, they do a large scale biennial all over New York City of all live performance art commissions that are either, I think like the majority, like 99% of the time they were commissioned for the biennial. Sometimes they weren't and they premiered somewhere first, but then came. You go every year, you love it, you see all of them, or you've literally never heard of it. And I also, at the time, I remember kind of like fudging my way through the interviews because they would be like, how do you feel about performance art? And I barely knew what that was. I think in my like contemporary art classes, I knew who like Laurie Anderson was. I knew who Matthew Barney was. And I knew like
the big ones.
Like Yoko Ono was like, I mean, I knew those, but I had no idea what performance art meant. Yeah. Mostly because it means literally everything. Yeah. Which once I got there, I understood more, of course. But I remember being like, I just feel like being back in the creative world. You know, it's really important. And I
Yeah.
didn't even like touch on performance art. So I went to Performa and it was an extreme culture shock. I went from working with 1,100 people at a institution that has been around for 150 years to working with 4 people at a very young institution, organization, where the founder was still running the institution. Um, and I also started like a month before that year's biennial. So it was a crazy time to start. And there was still fundraising that needed to happen for that biennial. But also was kind of a great time to start because I would have hated starting after and then having to wait forever to see biennial. So it was good for that reason. But yeah, so Performa's main output, their biggest financial need is for the biennial every other year. But then throughout the year, they also do other, they also curate and commission other performances, but that's sort of like their main thing. And they, yeah, so I was there for just a year and a half though. It was short, pretty sweet, but I knew it was time to go. It was really small. It was the first time I felt like we were talking about before, that high pressure of, if you don't make this money, this place will not exist, period. Yeah. And to be totally honest, there were weeks when I did not get paid.
Sounds about right.
And it, and I felt really helpless. I felt like I couldn't, it was this weird relationship because I felt like I especially couldn't advocate for myself because the reason we didn't have enough money in the bank account to pay paychecks was because I wasn't raising enough money. And although that wasn't like
that's not entirely
sad
true.
word for right. While that's not entirely true,
Yeah.
and while that was never said verbatim, that was the feeling that I got. And that was why I felt like I could not advocate for myself and make it an employment issue, which is what it was. And I think slowly in my career, I've just been advocating for myself more and more through hard lessons and jobs. Yeah. But so it was like those issues, which I sort of blew off, I sort of like brushed off at the time, but were major issues. And again, going back to, I was in a privileged position. I can still depend on my parents for money, and I didn't need to, you know, have that paycheck to make my rent, but a lot of people do, and it's unacceptable behavior.
I agree.
And I think the pressure there was what really got to me. And I think it was the first time that I felt real, like, anxiety inducing panic attack pressure at work with no like sense of like, I don't know, purpose or, you know, I felt pressure at the Jewish Museum. I felt pressure at AMNH, and there were high intense times of galas and making grant deadlines and having a big goal to meet, and God, COVID. But working there, it was like we were always in trauma mode. And I think that is the reality, for better or worse, of a lot of small nonprofits in New York City and worldwide. I think there are too many nonprofits worldwide in New York City that are all doing the same things, but that's for another time. And it started to really affect my like mental and physical health. And I, you know, it was a kind of a catch-22. I was feeling pressure at work and not performing well, and that added to more pressure. And I remember my boss sitting me down for a conversation that was not her firing me. It was not her, like, it was really meant to be a check-in. And I think she recognized that this job is impossible and I'm not succeeding because I'm not being set up to succeed. And she kind of gave me this opportunity to be like, things aren't going well. I want you, it was right before Thanksgiving. And she was like, go home for Thanksgiving break.
Yeah.
Come back. And either, let's think of a plan together to fix this, or we can just part ways, and that's fine. And I appreciated her like bluntness, because at that point I would have not. I would have never left without having another job. And I had only been there a year and a half, and I hadn't really taken the time to start to look again. But she kind of gave me this like out, for better or worse. And I knew my health had like taken a toll, and it was just like kind of time to pull the plug. And so I had like talking with my parents and kind of had decided to leave, and told her that, while at the same time I had gotten to know Hannah Gottlieb Graham because she had been involved in Performa. And I told her, I gave her a heads up that I was going to leave. And she was like, oh, Magazino needs someone.
Yeah.
Which brings us to you and me. So that was all like that Thanksgiving break. It was kind of crazy because I made the decision, and then I went in for like a coffee meeting with Vittorio on like the Monday before I went home. And things were super unofficial. It like wasn't even, it was just like a temperature check, I think, at that time. And yeah, that's kind of how that all started.
A lot of things happen for you around Thanksgiving, if you haven't noticed.
Oh God. Yeah, I'm nervous for this Thanksgiving.
November.
No, it'll be fun.
No, it'll be good this time. Okay, so you decided to then, essentially part ways with Performa, and then you started at Magazino, where you were the director of development.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about your time here?
Sure.
Where we met?
So to go back to Performa for a second, that was also my title at Performa.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that I was attracted to that job was going to a smaller institution meant that, one, I could get a major title bump that would have taken me another 6-7 years at Natural History Museum. Two, it was the first time I made $100K. And at Natural History, my salary was better, and they had really good raises built in there. I think they just like did, being an institution like that, but the promotion basis was like a much longer process, and it was very much in stone, unlike the Jewish Museum. And I knew it was going to take me years to get over 100K.
Yeah.
And even longer to get a director title. So Performa, while short and challenging, it was really important for my career to get that director development title, and also be the sole fundraiser at an institution was something I had never done before.
Yeah.
And it was the first time I ran galas, and I had done a lot of frontline fundraising, but I was really out on my own at Performa in a way that was terrifying and thrilling all at the same time. So when I went to Magazino, it was the same title. So it was a lateral move, but a higher salary. Yeah.
So tell us about your time at Magazino.
So Magazino, as you've had other guests from Magazino on here before.
Yes.
I knew about Magazino because there's a board member of the Jewish Museum whose family was involved. And so I'd actually visited when it first opened up in Cold Spring, in beautiful Cold Spring in the fall. And it was gorgeous.
Oh, a dream.
Gorgeous fall in Cold Spring. And what excited me was being back at a brick and mortar institution. That was a very challenging aspect to Performa. When we had the biennial, like, look, here's this thing. Come see the performances. Come experience it. But I forgot about like when you don't have the thing, like where do you take someone?
You don't exist.
Yeah. And I had been in museums where you like come and tour.
Yeah.
You come see these things. And that was like such a hard.
At Performa, you were selling a dream.
You were selling a dream.
Yeah.
Or like, look at these videos.
Yeah.
And it was so hard to get over that. And so going back to a brick and mortar, although those brick and mortars were like far away, was better. But similarly to Performa, Magazzino's founders are still running everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so I saw a lot of the same, although Magazzino is much younger, a lot of the same issues. Founders are founders for a reason. They have a great idea. They're not often good at implementing that idea or trusting anyone in their entire universe to implement their idea, which is so great. Founders are so controlling, and people in the art world are already so controlling.
Oh, yeah.
And perfectionists.
Yep.
And to my dying day, I hope to never work for founders again.
Fair.
Mostly because I like working for really old institutions now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was challenging because of that. And when I came on, Magazzino had just a year prior really started to actively fundraise because they started as an LLC and then became a private nonprofit later, which is still, being a private nonprofit is still more complicated than being a public one in terms of who can give you money, who wants to give you money. It has to do with like the percentage that the owners, the founders, are providing to the institution versus outside donors or a board. And you have to have a board, and it's a lot of things, and it's a slow transition.
But doesn't like a private nonprofit they don't need to have like a board where they can just have an advisory
They don't. They
board,
can have an advisory board,
which is
but
useless,
if you have
essentially.
a public nonprofit, they don't have to be a board that gives, but it has to be a public board.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't
you
know.
were there for when we were opening up the new
I was there when we were
building.
opening up the new building.
Yeah.
And that was incredibly exciting. I feel like I've been a part of being a part of the capital projects at Natural History was really great. There's nothing like, I had seen exhibitions open. Seeing a building open is crazy, especially because for those who have opened exhibitions, like the day before, you're like, this is not going to be finished. We're still painting. We're still hanging.
Yeah.
When you're opening a building, it's that times like 10,000. You're like, this doesn't have a ceiling.
Yeah.
Oh, it'll have a ceiling tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay.
You just kind of like,
you hold your breath and you pray.
kind of just trust that people know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I will say that one of the best things that I learned with the opening and with working at Magazzino overall for me was that I relished being part of a team again. At Performa, I didn't have a team. I had like 4 colleagues.
Yeah.
And even though there was no one else who was doing fundraising at Magazzino, I had colleagues again in New York City. And then also upstate, there were so many people who were docents and volunteers and full-time staff up there who we had in the city, like had to lean on them to know what they were doing. And oftentimes they knew everything better than we did anyway. And I loved being able to work with them and to delegate to them and not have to like hold everything inside me and like one person to do every job again.
Yeah.
So that was really great, especially when it came to the opening, the like crazy opening weekend.
The torrential hurricane.
Oh my God, the
downpour.
torrential rain. The fixing of toilets, as I mentioned before. I was so disgusted.
I was
that
like,
weekend.
where's Grace? Oh, she's fixing the toilet. I'm like, okay.
I was so gross that weekend. But leaning on my colleagues as hard as I did that weekend was so good. And they all like lived up to what they needed to do. And it really, it reaffirmed that when you hire people to know what they're doing, you need to trust them to do their fucking job. And if you don't, then they don't want to work for you. They don't feel like they have any trust or autonomy or buy-in to the institution. And I've like, will carry that through forever, that delegation is like oftentimes what can like make or break an event, an institution, everything. You have to like trust your colleagues and trust that they know what they're doing and they're gonna get it done because you've hired them or you instill in them, their responsibility to do that.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, to be fair, I was like a control freak in the beginning
Yeah.
of like my career where like I felt like I needed to do everything and no one else could touch it
Right.
because I didn't trust them. And then as I just like grew up and grew more comfortable in my role,
Yeah.
I was like, please just honestly just do my job for me. I don't even want to do it.
Exactly. And I mean, it also made me realize like I don't always know the best way to do things.
Exactly.
Like, will I maybe do it like the most efficiently? Sure, but someone else may do it more creatively
Yeah.
or just like differently than me.
Yeah.
And I also those times when I felt the most stressed and anxious and under pressure, it was because I was doing it all myself.
Yeah. 100%.
And because I either didn't have the colleagues to depend on, or I felt like I can't depend on them because I'm the only one who can do it correctly. And no institution should be one person.
Yeah.
Like at all.
I agree.
So it's just growing up and getting more comfortable in my career and knowing that as you take on more responsibility, there's no way you can keep doing everything.
Yeah.
It's just impossible.
So I was going to ask you, what's the most challenging aspect of working at Magazino besides fixing the toilets?
The egos were a huge issue. I have worked for men frequently in the past. I worked for a chief curator at the Jewish Museum who was a man who I got along with great. My boss at Natural History was a man who I got along with great. I have always loved my female colleagues. In our field, it is just mostly females naturally. But I had never worked, and a performer, it was like 100% women.
Yeah.
I'd never worked with, which is surprising because I've been working in the arts for so long, with men with such huge egos that it was just like alarming and shocking. And I don't know if it was cultural, being Italians, or if it was just generational. I don't know what it was, but it really was the egos of the founders and also Vittorio, who had been the founding director, who would, they just hold on to things so tightly. And the egos would spill over into everything, like away from work. It was just exhausting. And you end up just saying whatever to everything because there's no frequently what would happen. And you were there with me.
Yeah.
We have expertise in our fields in
Right.
marketing communications and fundraising. We have those titles. We're hired for those things. And when a director or a founder would ask for your opinion on something or ask you to work on something that is in that field, and you then have opinions on it or then produce something or have questions on something, those things are met with hostility. And it is though your questions are no longer questions, they're arguments, and you're being combative. And I am an outspoken woman, and I am an opinionated woman at all times in everything. But I had never in my life thought that was a bad thing. I mean,
That's actually one of the things I love about you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I mean, I will remember, and this is something Elise did for me also early in my career at the Jewish Museum. And I've always been someone who asks a lot of questions because I want to learn, or because I think something needs to be talked about. And even when I was young, I didn't think that my age meant I couldn't ask questions in meetings. And because I was doing exhibitions, I was in like a big curatorial meeting and asked a question about something. And the person who was in between Elise and me was in that meeting, but Elise wasn't. And I remember after that meeting, this woman told me, I don't want you to ask questions in meetings. Like if we have questions, like I'll ask them. You don't need to speak in these meetings.
That's crazy.
And I was so taken aback by that. And I probably did what I shouldn't have done, which is I went straight to Elise because we had this relationship and whatever. I leapfrogged over this person and I was like, should I not be doing this? And Elise very wisely said to me that don't stop asking questions. Don't stop being present. I think you can make yourself more like demure or more
Demure is the word of
I know
the
demure, I
season.
know, God. Or just, she was trying to say like, don't quiet down, but you can attune yourself to be around different people. So she was like, that's that person's opinion. I don't think you did anything wrong. I think you should keep doing these things, but be more thoughtful about how you say the things in front of the certain people. And then when I was at Natural History Museum, my boss, who is a man, Dan Slippin, who is a brilliant government fundraiser who very randomly adopted the corporate team because no one knows where to put corporate ever. And he is a total, like, he is no filter, just totally out there. And we were talking about like maybe it was performance review or something. And he was like, Grace, I just have to tell you, we're in the closed door. I have to tell you that a lot of people think that you're a bitch. But I love that you're a bitch.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Why are outspoken women automatically labeled as bitches?
I don't know. He was
or aggressive or intimidating.
Yes. I don't, because we live in a patriarchy.
Obviously.
But yeah, so it was the second time in my career where it was like the higher up person was saying, I don't think you should stop doing what you're doing. I don't think you should stop being who you are. Also, like, I couldn't. Like, I'm not really capable of not doing those things.
Yeah.
I've tried. I think I've altered it in some ways. I'm definitely more like thoughtful about things before I say them most of the time. I think, but yeah, so going to magazine, it wasn't like it was the first time a superior of mine was like, don't ask questions, like just do it.
Yeah.
But it was alarming to come from someone who was A, my own age, B, someone who had zero experience in my area of expertise and was part of like a intimate team where we all need to be teammates, and treated me in a way when these, questions came up in a way that I would like never respond to literally anyone. And so the dismissiveness of don't ask questions, don't do it. And the egos of like, this is how we're doing it. It's my way. Just move on. After a while, you just like say fine. And you don't feel inspired to do anything.
Or be creative.
Yeah. You're like, why even? And there would be a time when, he would show me something and I'd be like, do you actually want my opinion on this?
Yeah.
And he would be like, yeah. And I'd be like, well, last time you didn't.
Yeah.
So if you don't want my feedback and opinions, don't pretend to want it. And you just get really defeated after a while.
100%.
That, fine. I don't need, you want to do all the jobs. You want to make up all the things and not have my insight and opinion. You can keep paying me, not have that. That's fine.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you bring this up because this has happened to me throughout like my career where I've seen as a woman the double standards in meetings and how we're allowed to speak and address certain things. And like when our opinion is shared and then really not even considered. And it's crazy to me because I've seen men act unhinged. And when I tell you unhinged, I mean completely unhinged in meetings.
Yeah.
To the point that if a woman was doing the behaviors that they would be, she would be fired on the spot.
On the spot.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm just like, and the second that like you speak your true opinion, you are hostile, you are aggressive, you are this, you are that. And I'm just like it really becomes like you at some point you're just like, why am I even here?
Right. It's like, if you want me to like sit down and shut up, then like you don't need anyone in this position.
Yeah.
And it would be, I would understand someone being like, I don't want to hear your opinion, but someone not even wanting me to ask like a question, or that a question so basic as like, why are we bolding the word the?
Right.
As Like, why are you so combative? Why do you have to argue about everything? And I honestly don't know if it was cultural differences, tones.
I don't know, because I've experienced this across the
I don't-
board
okay,
in
fine.
my positions before.
Yes, that it
like
was
this
just-
position that I have now
Yeah.
is the first time where I feel like my opinion matters,
Ugh,
and
such a good
where I
feeling.
feel completely supported by my team, and
Yeah.
most importantly my boss, who's
Yeah.
like, you know what, we hired you for a reason, I trust you.
Yeah.
Those are like the best words you can hear
And
from
how
a
much
superior.
do you like want to do your work?
Right.
It's just, and I will never, I think, something that's made me a good boss, mentor, whatever, is that I've seen some of the worst behavior
Same.
and the things that I don't want to do. And I know how a bad superior can make me feel. Just completely like that I'm worthless, that my time is worthless, that the work I do is worthless. To such like a fundamental level that you're just like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah. The mark
And-
of a
yeah.
good institution, like you mentioned, is how long people stay there.
Oh my God.
Because you
Well,
can
yeah,
tell.
Carolina, you
Except-
were at
okay, no.
Magazino for a very long time.
Listen, because there was really good parts about it for me
Yeah.
that I loved. But I think you also need to gain a perspective of going outside and actually seeing the grass sometimes is greener on the other side.
It is. And having said all of that about Magazino, I really did have like high hopes to stay there for a long time. I loved working with you. I loved working with Hannah and Julia.
Yeah, I
and
love the
Laura.
people in the team.
And it was a beautiful place to go. And I thought, and I was at the beginning of this like real momentum of fundraising and membership that had just literally launched the month before I started there. And I was so excited to be part of something new that also had like some funding underneath it, some clout, a good team. Like I saw the bones of it could be.
But you built
good.
it up the first year. Like you were doing events left and right.
Right.
You were
I
doing
was
the
so
memberships.
excited.
Like, yeah.
And I had like long-term plans for that and really was excited. So when I was fired, it was, I would say professionally, the most difficult part of my entire career. I'd never been fired before, obviously. I mean, the Performa thing was, it was a parting of ways. And I felt like if I ever called them up and said, I need a recommendation or I need XYZ, I feel like I could go back there and do that. I didn't want to burn bridges there. And I think I left at the right time before that happened. And at Magazino, it was the most defeated I've ever felt. And I think the shock of it took a long time to wear off. And the like stop blaming myself for something that happened that wasn't my fault, and trying to like understand something that was incomprehensible and all of these things, and being unemployed for 9 months, 10 months. And yeah, it was awful. And
I'm glad that you're actually sharing that honest experience, because I feel like it's important, because I feel like a lot of people do struggle with either finding a job or
Yeah.
being fired. Those like finding a job is hard.
It's really
So
hard.
especially in a
Yeah.
place like New York City, where yes, there are a lot of job opportunities, but you're also competing against so many other people.
Yeah. It's really hard, and looking for a job when you already have a job is time consuming.
Yes.
But the pressure is off.
Yeah.
When you are running out of unemployment time, like money, the pressure is on.
Yeah.
And I think you start to question everything. And you and I talked about this
Yeah.
this summer when you originally wanted to have me on the podcast.
Yeah.
And at the time I was like, I think I hate the arts. I think I hate nonprofits.
Yeah, you were
I think
questioning
I'm
your
like,
whole life.
I'm like, I'm a
Grace.
horrible fundraiser. I can't even do this. Like, what am I doing?
Because of one thing. that
Yeah.
didn't even define you in any way, shape, or
because
form.
of one thing. And I think it took me a while to realize that it didn't define me. And part of that struggle was that my persona, my social life, the curated person that I've created has been very attached to my career in many ways. I think for good. I mean, I love museums. I'm a young patron at many institutions. I spend my free time in museums, my free time at galleries. Most of my friends work in the art world. And I love it. And so my job has not always just been a job, partially because in fundraising, you have to like feel an attachment to what you do, but also because I invite friends to my galas or to my events, or it's just sort of more, and I don't know if this is the same in other fields, but in the arts, it feels like your job is like extends beyond you.
Yeah.
In a way, and it's really part of who you are. And so it was the embarrassment of getting fired. And then it was also the like, who the fuck am I?
Yeah.
It was, I'm not a fundraiser anymore. I don't work at a museum anymore. I have no idea who I am. And that's all I've done for the last a decade at that point, or 11 years.
But look at that. You've done this for a decade, right? This one bad thing happens, and then you're like, I don't know who I am anymore.
I know. It was
Which I think for you is hard because it happened so late in your career, whereas I've been fired 3 times, but all of them.
No, you haven't.
Yes. And all 3 times was because I spoke up and I advocated for myself.
Oh, God.
But they were all in the early stages of my career, like literally right out of school, and once when I was still in school.
Yeah.
So they didn't really affect me.
Yeah, this was deep into my career, and it was when I had already built up a reputation to some degree. And I was, and I started to have these sometime in the spring when I was like going really crazy.
When you were unhinged.
I was really unhinged this spring. Actually, I think one of the funniest things I did during my unemployment was I drank a lot the first month. And a lot of people like drunk buy fun things.
Oh, you told me about your printer.
I drunk bought a printer.
I was like, Grace, I think you need help.
I drunk bought a printer because I had this panic one night that I'm going to have to print my resumes and cover letters. And I don't have a printer to print these things.
No one does that anymore.
So I literally bought a printer, and it showed up a few days later. And I was like, did someone send me a printer? And then I literally bought it. So it was crazy. But I still use that printer.
Oh, I'm glad it's being put to some sort of use. I'd hope so.
But it's so funny. But yeah, at some point in this spring, I just really started thinking that the reason I wasn't even getting interviews. And I was like, it's because the word on the street is Grace is not good at her job.
That was not the word on the street.
That is just like all your brain goes into.
Yeah, of course, your brain starts projecting these crazy
things.
Stories, none of which is true.
Right. And so
all
I was
of it
like,
is the worst.
Everyone knows I'm like tainted goods. No one's going to want to hire
Tainted goods.
me. Like literally, that is what I was thinking, that no one's going to want to hire me. And it was a real struggle. And I think it's given me.
Yeah, but then at some point you started getting into a flow. You started getting interviews.
I started getting to interviews and got really, really close on one, final round of 2 after 6 weeks of interviewing and didn't get it. And that was like, felt like a huge setback.
I just want to say, if you're doing interviews for 6 weeks
Oh
with a candidate and then you say no to them, you deserve to go to prison. Straight to jail. That's crazy.
I agree. The one thing this place did, though, it's called Atmos. It's a nonprofit magazine that focuses on the intersection between nature and art. So very interesting things. And I would be angry if I hadn't like loved interviewing with them. I like really
you told me about that.
I like really fell in love with them when I was interviewing. Yeah. And they were so, even though it took forever, they were so communicative. And I appreciated that so much. And they paid me to do my like writing sample.
That's amazing. And that's how it should be always.
Yeah.
Because you're paying somebody for their time.
100%. I had like an hour-long writing assignment and they paid me $250.
That's more than most writers actually get paid.
It's way more.
Yeah.
I was So had all that not happened, I would have been like burn them to the
Okay.
ground. But they were actually really
Okay, fair.
They were really great. And then the Governor's Island thing is funny because I saw the person who was in my position before left in like mid-spring,
Mhm.
and I saw it posted, and I was like, there is no way I am going to Governor's Island, because I had spent my whole career walking to work. I walked to the Jewish Museum. I walked across the park every day to natural history. Performa, it was COVID. We were remote. Magazino, we had our office on the Upper East Side. I was like, I cannot go from that to going to an island. And then a few more months passed and the Atmos thing happened and I didn't get it. And actually, Hannah reached out because a mutual friend of, or her friend, Lauren Haynes, was named as the new curator there back in the spring. And Lauren had said, we're looking for someone. And then the next day, a different friend from a totally different universe was like, have you heard about this? I think you should really consider it. And I was like, okay, let me just consider it.
Mhm.
And then I interviewed and it was great. And now I love the people. So it's good.
I think this was like the universe telling you stop buying printers and apply to this job.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that you finally ended up there.
So it's all good. But I will say, as much as I have like moved past a lot of those things, I like had to have my therapist tell me, like, you went through an extreme trauma.
Yeah.
And when I started this job, it's subsided for the most part now, but my first month, every day, I went in thinking like, they're just going to fire me today.
Yeah. I mean, that's a natural response because it's PTSD.
I was just in like defense mode, that I spent my first month terrified of fucking up, that I was going to be fired before I was even like doing a job. There was nothing for me to fuck up and I was like terrified. And now I feel fine, but it's still, I mean, that's still going to take time.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I will, I'll get over it, the whole thing eventually, but I still feel a lot of ill will towards Magazino and towards the founders and Vittorio for
That's a normal
how
feeling.
I was dismissed and how I was treated when I was there and then dismissed. And I don't feel like that needs to heal. I don't feel like I need to have any kind of relationship with those people or that institution. It was a part of my life and I'm going to take certain things from it, but I don't feel like in order to heal myself, I need to like heal those relationships.
I don't think you do either. I think it was a stepping stone to another opportunity, and that's what it should be, a lesson learned. Yeah. And that's it.
Yeah.
Well, on to better questions.
Yes.
In true development fashion, you're also a member of the Apollo Circle at the Met, which you've mentioned before. Obviously, the art world has a ton of art patron groups.
Yes.
Can you tell us why you decided on this one in particular?
Sure. So in true Grace Astrove fashion, when I was moving to New York City, my grandfather, my dad is from Scarsdale, so my grandfather lived there, and that's why I spent so much time in the city going to museums, and he was a patron of the Met. And when I was moving here, he didn't say like, oh, I want you to join the Met, but he was like, I want to support you joining a young patron group at a museum. I wanted it for the social aspects, of course, and I just knew I really wanted to do that. So I looked at all of the top ones and I compared how much they cost and what kind of programming they had, what kind of programming for the actual group, but also like what else was going on there. And I wanted to make it like the best decision. So I looked at them all and I decided on the Met because I loved the museum anyway, but it was a little bit more expensive, but relative to the amount of programming they had and just what the institution overall offered, it is like the most bang for your buck, to like use a crass term. It really, when I started, it was $1,000 membership. Now it's $1,200 annually.
How long have you been?
Since 2012.
2012. Okay, so wow.
Yeah.
So that's a long time.
Yeah.
That's over a decade.
Yeah. 12
Okay.
years. Yeah. And I renew every year without question. Like we said earlier, getting to go there when it's empty, seeing exhibitions before they open, getting to hear directly from curators. I have met some of my closest friends just through the Met.
1,200 for the year, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, if you break it down by month,
Yeah.
it's like $120.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know if I'm doing my math
100,
correctly.
but yeah.
Okay, 100. Thank you. No, I suck at math.
And you also get like every other thing a membership gets. So every time I go to the Met,
Mhm.
I and 6 guests can go for free.
Yeah.
And the Met is really expensive.
Now it is. Well,
really expensive.
Wait, don't New Yorkers go in
They
for
do.
free? Yeah.
Sorry. So like, but yes,
Well, out of
otherwise.
towners.
Out of
yeah, it's
towners.
expensive.
And let me tell you, I take advantage of it. I go. My favorite thing at the Met is they're open late on Friday and Saturday nights,
Mhm.
which is also like no one's there. It's a great time to go.
Really? Because I've gone to the MoMA on Friday and I wanted to
No.
literally leave.
Well, it's like free. It's free Fridays, right?
Yeah,
Okay, so the Met is
it's
never
awful.
free. But they're open late Friday, Saturdays,
Mhm.
and they often have like a quartet or something or whatever, and it's so great. So I love it, and they obviously have like great huge galas. We just had the Apollo Circle Gala a couple weeks or like last week, which is like a little mini Met Gala. We get to party in the Temple of Denver and wear gowns, and it's fantastic.
Is
But
that included in the membership or is
it's
that
not.
additional?
So it's an additional
Okay.
cost. And I was actually just thinking this year, talking with my friends, that I don't know, I feel like we're growing up and I'm kind of over that phase of my life. I don't see myself leaving the Apollo Circle. I mean, most young patrons group age out at either 39 or 45.
Okay.
The Met's 45. And I don't see myself leaving that because it's just, the benefits are so great. But I don't know. I've kind of moved on from the days of like staying up till 2 a.m.
I don't believe you at all. You're at every gala, at every party. I'm always just seeing BFA photos of you in beautiful dresses.
I don't know. This one, I was feeling it for a few days
Okay.
after.
Okay.
Well, at least the next day I
Fair.
was feeling it.
Fair.
Yeah.
And I also want to know, because you're obviously a member of these patron groups,
Mhm.
what are the benefits of being in a young patron group? Obviously, besides, getting
Yeah.
free admission and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
I think it really is the community. I mean, you find out what you're interested in. There is young patron group for everything. I mean, I know museums best, but the Jewish Museum Young Patrons group, it's honestly like a lot of people who aren't even interested in art. They just are Jewish and want to be a part of something that's not like religious, and they want to have a little art on the side. But there's like the Central Park Conservancy has Young Patrons group if you're really into the park. And it is, if you have extra income, I think it is just such a good use of your money to meet new people. I've met some of my closest friends in these groups. And it's a great social aspect to have. That's not like, I don't know, I guess some people like join kickball groups. This is what I do instead. I don't know. I think
Okay.
there
I would rather this than
what some
kickball,
people
but
do? Some people join like run clubs. It's really popular.
what the hell's a run club?
You like run and then drink afterwards. This is like so much more
Okay, I
fun.
could just drink without
And
the
you
running.
get to see art. And I think the biggest benefit for me, and I think for anyone who has a job 9 to 5, we don't have time to go to museums.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Or it's on the weekends.
Yeah.
But these programs are after hours. So you're getting to go see an exhibition from 7 to 9 p.m. that I usually, honestly, with the Met, those are the only time I see the show. One, because I don't want to deal with crowds, but also I just don't make it there as much as I used to.
If you had to recommend 3 patron groups apart from the
Yeah.
Met,
Mhm.
which ones would it be?
Okay, so one that I've had my eye on for a while, and just mostly because it's glamorous,
Mhm.
is the Frick. But I don't have
Oh,
a
I
very
love
strong.
the
I don't
Frick.
have a very strong interest in that you love.
Yeah, I do, I
That's
do.
like your favorite.
Yeah.
I don't have a very strong interest in the art period, so I
Mhm.
have a trouble justifying it,
Okay.
and it's like just as expensive as the Met. But the Frick has great clout.
It's beautiful.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
So I think that one. One that I did for like a hot minute because my friend ran the group was the New York City Ballet Young
Okay.
Patrons group. Just like with a museum, you get to see stuff. Like a lot of performances are included. The parties were so much fun, and the dancers were very involved in the group, which was great because like they're the same age. Which was always fun because you got to meet like really, I guess famous in that world, but really famous dancers, and they would come to the programs and come to the events with us and like do talks, and so that was really fun, and I liked that. And then another one that I'm involved in that I love is the winter show.
Oh, okay.
So
I didn't know they had one.
Yeah, so it's not like a young patrons group. It's called, oh my God, I literally forget what it's called. But during the winter show, there is, Young Collectors. That's what it's called. Young Collectors. It's for the winter show itself in January, which runs for like 2.5 weeks. There's a night that's called Young Collectors Night, and we are the committee for that night. But like any good nonprofit, they run programming throughout the year. So we, as members of that group, you pay like $1,000 to be on the committee. So it's not like technically a membership, but you get invited to things throughout the whole year. And I did that more recently. Honestly, it was a personal ask. Like a development colleague who is the president, like asked me, and I was like, yeah, of course. And then I ended up really loving it because the design and antiques, and it's just so fun to see the actual work. And then I really liked the people. So it was a little bit, I don't know, unique, just like outside my normal wheelhouse.
Yeah.
And I liked it. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, 2 questions before we head into the fire round, which is, have you experienced any particular challenges in the field as a woman?
I mean, other than
Everything that we discussed.
other than everything we've just discussed, male ego especially.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the biggest challenge is people's perception of me before they meet me. And I think about this honestly. Vittorio made a passing comment once that kind of stuck with me, that he was like, I didn't realize I hired another Carolina. I take
that as a compliment.
I do too. But what I mean by that is either how I interview is very different, or because people don't necessarily assume a woman is going to be this like outspoken or in charge or demanding or whatever adjectives. That it's like, this isn't what I thought I bought.
Yeah, because he was used to me fighting with him all the time.
Right.
That he hired you and then he did
I don't know,
something
maybe
else.
that's on me that I'm too like,
I think because you're so outgoing, people assume that you're naturally
get along with
sweet
everyone.
and get along with everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think, of course, when you interview, you're like sweet and yes, of course, I love that.
Yeah, of course, you put on your
but
best
that's
face.
not. Yeah, and I think I do have different personas. The person I am in like a work meeting is not who I am when I'm meeting with a donor.
Yeah,
like
100%.
And sometimes I do think that not just men, but many people would worry that the way I am in a meeting one-on-one, like I would need like a lecture before going into a meeting that's like, now you don't want to be, and I'm like, I know how to do this.
Yeah.
So that maybe, but yeah, I don't know that like particularly men. If anything, I sometimes find it easier to work with men, just sometimes.
Depending on the man.
I don't know, maybe they're like easier to manipulate sometimes. I don't know.
I mean, yes.
I've had some really like those people who made the comment about me like being a bitch in natural history, those were all women.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And I had the other woman at Jewish Museum who was like threatened by me or upset with me, like speaking out at a meeting. So I don't know. I feel like I've had mix of working well with different genders.
Fair. And then
Yeah.
what is the advice that you would give to the incoming generation of women who want to work in the arts?
Oh my God.
You're like, Godspeed.
Godspeed. Two things. One that's really practical is that write down literally, this isn't just women, this is for everyone going into this field, especially development. Write down everything you ever do at a job. I learned finally when being in natural history that, I would just keep like a running Google sheet of like every month. Like I did these like literally bullet points
Mhm.
so that at the end of the day, when you are evaluating yourself for a raise or you are trying to like write a cover letter for your next job, whatever it is, your job title, your job description is nowhere near what you're actually doing.
Amen.
And the expectations that are put on you and how you perform are nowhere near on that. So like just jot it down because doing it in the moment is just the best record of it. So I've always started to do that. And it's silly small things to
No, it's smart.
to big things, and knowing what you did is very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because then when you're actually having to write a cover letter and do your resume,
Yes.
and then you're sitting there thinking, you're like, shit, what do I
Yeah.
do?
And like going into like leading into that, I think the more meaningful aspect, especially for this next generation of women going into it, and honestly, I think they're better at this anyway than millennials were, is knowing what your worth is, what your time is worth, and making that known to others,
Mhm.
and not, it took me a long time to understand, and perhaps this is just being in a privileged position that money wasn't my only objective in this field. A lot of times it can't be because we get paid horribly.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that I shouldn't get paid a good salary.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that what I'm doing is not worth a good salary. And sort of just like understanding that and knowing how to advocate for yourself. And I think maybe being in development, I'm more comfortable with that now.
Mhm.
I'm able to ask other people for money for an institution. I should be able to ask for money for myself for doing this job. But it's something that everyone should be doing. And yeah, so those two things.
That's actually great.
Yeah.
Because I am all for people advocating for themselves,
Yeah.
especially women. Because we always tend to undersell ourselves just not to be problematic and a pain.
Right. And I think jotting down those little things, you look back at it a year, you're like, oh, I did all of this
Yeah.
for this institution. I'm not misremembering things. I'm not conflating myself. This is like concrete. This is what I did for this place.
Yeah.
This is why I should be earning more money.
Right.
Or this is why I need to like go somewhere else and earn more
Right.
money.
It's a great way to be like, hey, this is what I did. Give me a raise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, on to the fire round of questions.
Yes.
All right, so you can pick a number between 1 and 10, and I'll read the corresponding question too.
6.
6. What is a piece of art that you own that you would never sell, or one that is your favorite?
Ooh.
It's a Taylor Swift poster, isn't it?
Oh my God. Definitely not. I mean, no, I wouldn't sell that. I have probably, it's not like an expensive piece of art,
It doesn't have to be.
but it is I went to Mexico City actually right before the pandemic, like literally February, on a bachelorette trip of all things.
Mm.
But we went to this great like artisan craft area, and there was a man who was doing ceramics, and my mother was or is a ceramicist, and I have a lot of her ceramic pieces, and I've always really liked pottery and ceramics. And there was a man who was doing kind of like surrealist shapes, and there was one that it was like a glove. It was like a hand statue, but it reminded me of these old in like French antique stores. They would
Mhm.
have like the glove mannequins
Mhm.
that I always liked in the old photographs. And so he was making these, and they were ceramic and like a beige, and then painted with these like intricate, beautiful blue colors. And I think it cost me like, I don't know, $90 or something, but I love it. And it sits on my my dresser and I see it every day. And it's this like weird, interesting piece of art. And getting it back was so weird because it was like wrapped, but I guess I went through the X-ray, it literally looked like a hand.
Mhm.
And it made me like unwrap the whole
Imagine they thought you were like trying to leave with like a severed
I
hand.
know. And they made me unwrap the whole thing. So I love that. And my Taylor Swift poster.
Yes.
For sure.
I'm really into ceramics right now.
I
Like,
love it.
I'm obsessed with ceramics this year. Like, there's a couple of pieces that I really am looking forward to getting because that's like my new obsession.
Yeah.
Ceramics are having a moment. Okay.
I love it. It's like kind of folk, but it can be so it's other reason I also like glass a lot.
Yeah.
I love glass art.
I'm still not into glass, but maybe I'll get there after
That's
my love
valid.
of ceramics.
That's valid. Yeah.
Okay, pick another one.
2.
2. This one's good for you. Name a book or film that had a profound influence on your life.
Well, we already talked about from the Mixed Up Files,
Yes.
and this is Basil E. Frankweiler,
Yes.
Which had a profound effect on me. Outside of that, and outside of my career, I think my all-time favorite book, the book that I have multiple copies of and read, I probably revisit it every other year, is The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. And those
You
who know me
would
know, like
love
I'm
that one.
obsessed with. I
Yeah.
mean, I have a whole bookshelf row that is dedicated to I probably have 30 Plath books from
She's an incredible writer.
biographies, collected letters, her own writings, poetry, everything. I mean, I'm fascinated by her. And The Bell Jar, which is her only novel.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people think she wrote so much. I mean, she killed herself when she was 30.
Yeah, she had a tragic life.
I think early 30s. I want to say
Yeah.
33. And she, for such a young age, she did produce a lot, but a majority is poetry. And then her correspondences are poetry in themselves. But The Bell Jar is something that I've read, I mean, probably 20 times since high school.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I read it, in high school and college as a like whimsical, like depressive, girl interrupted, like crazy girl in New York, like, isn't this who I want to be? And I don't know,
Wow, you had big
delusional
dreams.
things. No, just like the idealized, like crazy girl.
Yeah.
And then revisiting it as I grow older, like seeing Esther Greenwood, the main character, who is a stand-in for Sylvia Plath herself. And then when I first read it, like I didn't know much about her. And now visiting it again after reading her biography is like seeing so much of her younger self in it. And how she's dealing with the everyday stressors of life and just being incapable of dealing with them, and how I don't want to be like her, or how in some ways it's good to be like her. And I love it. And it's just kind of this great snapshot of New York City in a hot summer, and it's very atmospheric. And it was also maybe an early book that I wanted to be in New York for so long, but it's one of the early books that I was like, the beat of the city. This is what it's going to be like to live there.
And for those who don't know, you're actually a voracious reader, and you have your own Instagram called Gracie's Booked.
I do. I actually started the Bookstagram. That's actually something I started when I worked at Natural History, because I felt I've always been a big reader, and I have 1,100 books in my apartment, my tiny
Where
studio
the hell
apartment.
do you fit them?
They are everywhere. And I had like posted things on my my personal Instagram of books, and always when I travel, my 2 things on an itinerary are museum and bookstores. And when I was in Natural History, I felt like I needed to like stretch my creative wings a little bit. And so I started this Instagram that is just like totally focused on books and reading. And I found this whole like great community of other bookstagrammers in New York City. And my other big part of my social life is going to literary events, and I love meeting authors and hearing about what they're reading. And reading is, and the one good thing about my commute is
Reading.
It is an hour every morning, an hour every afternoon of uninterrupted reading.
Yeah.
And it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also love your TikTok.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I'm always like, oh, look
Thank
at
you
this.
so
This
much.
is so cute.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, one last question.
Yeah. 9.
9. What do you always travel with?
A book.
Of course. Why did I even bother asking?
I do always travel with a book. But when I travel, I do travel with a Kindle because
I will not take you as the Kindle girl.
I know. Well, my library books are all my Kindle because New York Public Library and the Queens. And so if you're a New Yorker, you can belong to the New York Public Library, the Queens Public Library, and the Brooklyn Public Library, even if you live in Manhattan.
Wow.
So I have all 3.
Of course.
And I get all my like digital loans on my Kindle. So when I travel, because I read a book every 2 days, I don't want to lug around a bunch of books.
Fair.
And I'm going to buy books when I'm abroad
Yeah.
because I always buy books when I'm traveling. So I have my Kindle. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, but I feel like nothing beats the physical pages and the smell of that paper.
It's very true. And that's why I have so many. But yeah, I got into the Kindle world. I feel like it was like right before a big trip, maybe 7-8 years ago.
Mhm.
And I was fearful of like, I'm going to finish this book and then I'm not going to want to bring another one book. And then maybe I'm not going to have enough books.
Yeah.
I don't know. So it just had a Kindle and that solved those issues. Yeah, so I do both.
Okay.
But if I love a library book on my Kindle, I obviously buy a physical copy of it.
Okay, fair enough. Well, thank you so much for being
Thank
here and for being
you.
honest and sharing your experiences. It
Yeah.
was honestly so great to hear about everything and to chat with you.
Good. Thank you so much.
Of course. And to all my viewers, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.